Hello guys and gals and welcome to a new tutorial. In today's video we're going to be covering this cool little bubble shader that I've posted previously. And if we've got time I'm going to be showing you how to just put together this particle system as well, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the material. So you'll see here we've got this nice rainbow around the outside that kind of twists around, and in certain positions on a lighter background you can see that we actually have this nice swirly rainbow inside the bubble itself that also swirls around. So it gives it that illusion that there's some swirling going on the surface of the bubble. So let's hop right into this. We're going to right click material and we'll call this bubbles_m. We'll open this up, and the first thing that we're going to do obviously is change our blend mode to translucent because we need to be able to see through these things. Now then, to get that nice coloring on the edge, we're going to have to take the current color data and we're going to have to shift its hue, and we're going to use a previously a precompiled material function called hue shift. So we're going to right click and we're going to search for material function. Cool, there we are. And this will start unspecified, but if we head over to material function in the drop down and we search for assets, we can find hue shift like so, and this is what you'll get: a hue shift percentage and a texture v3 and a result. And this is going to allow us to actually change our colors around. But we're going to do this based on where the pixel is and then compare it to where our camera is. So we're going to search for a pixel normal world space, and we're also going to need a camera vector. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to get the dot product of these two values. Or we would if my engine was going to play ball dot product. So we're going to get the dot product of these two values here. And then we're just going to append this value back into itself. Like so. So we're going to need two values coming through here. We're going to need a texture coordinate. And the reason we're going to get a texture coordinate here is just so that you can then use this if you decide to put another material inside of your bubble, just to give it an extra little bit of oomph, I guess. So we're going to get a texture coordinate, hold U and left click for this. And we're going to get a scalar parameter, hold S and left click, and we'll call this tiling. We're going to give this a default value of 1, so that the UVs of whatever texture you plug into this will just be 1. Obviously, if you wanted to tile it, you'd change this value to whatever you need to, but we've set it to be a scalar parameter, so we can change this in an instant to whatever we need it to be later. So to make this work, we need to hold M and left click for a multiply, and we'll plug these both in, like so. And then we're going to add this value back into our append here, like so. And we're going to plug this into the hue shift percentage, like so. Now what we'll do is we're going to hold 3 and left click, and we're just going to give this a base color. I'm just going to go with red, and I'm going to plug this directly into the texture v3. So this is where we can put a texture, but I'm just going to be using a color here just so we can see this working. We can go ahead and plug this into base color. And what we should see is a difference in color depending on where our camera is currently looking. As usual, Unreal Engine's shader compiler decides to take forever. There we are. So you can see here we're getting this nice rainbow that changes depending on where our camera is. Now we're not going to use this directly. You see here we're getting this really nice result, and you can see how we're going to be using this later on, maybe some of you. But we can see that it's working, so we're just going to break this result out because we don't actually want this to be plugged into our base color. Instead, we're going to be using a Fresnel so that this only happens on the outside. So we're going to right click Fresnel, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to add some values to this. By default, our exponent in is 5, as you can see here, and our base reflect is 0.4. We're going to hold S and left click for a scalar, and we'll call this our exponent, which we know is a default of 5, and we're just doing this so that we can change this in runtime should we need to, and then 0.04 for the reflect, 0.04, plug this into the base reflect fraction index, and there we go. So what we're going to do with this now is we're going to hold L and left click for a lerp, and we're going to be using this as a mask. So we're going to plug this directly into the alpha here. And we'll plug the hue shift into the B. And we're going to leave the A empty. And if we preview this, now we should see that we get black towards the middle, or a darker rainbow, and lighter on the outside. So we can see that's working perfectly. So we're just going to stop our preview there. And we could just plug this directly into our base color, but we now need to add a little bit more to it just so that we get some nice swirlies going on. And we're going to use a texture for this. I've provided you with the texture, but if you wanted to make one yourself, it's just a render clouds in Photoshop that I've then assigned a swirl to. So we're going to hold down a T, and then we're going to find our texture. I believe I've got it in this folder. Here we are. What we'll do here is we will drag this into our texture. There we go. Or just search for it. It's called swirl mask underscore T. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to multiply this by a value, hold S and left click for a scalar, and we're going to call this swirl power. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to decide how powerful this mask will be. Obviously, if we go above 1, all of the whites are going to get brighter and they'll affect our texture some more. But we don't just want this to sit here, we want this to actually move around, be a little bit swirly, and to do this we're going to use a rotator. And this is going to allow it to rotate around. But we're also going to be using our current screen position. And we're going to use the screen position so that we always get this swirl in the center, so that when our bubble's moving around, it doesn't take the swirl with it. The swirl will always face us. And it's going to give this really nice mixture because the rainbow on the outside will rotate and the middle will rotate on its own. So they'll feel like they're made of 2 different layers. Even though it's only one material, it will feel like 2 layers. And we're going to do this using a screen aligned UVs. Oop, it's going to be caps lock on, there we go. And because this is a 512 by 512 and this is a 512 512 by default, we don't need to change this. We're just going to plug the X and the Y 100% into the coordinate. And now that will affect our swirly. So we're going to hold M for a multiply, plug our lerp in and our previous multiply into the new multiply. And now this is going to let the swirly pattern affect our color and mask. So if we plug this directly into the base color here, we now have our color doing exactly what we want. And we'll plug this into the emissive as well, just so we get a little bit less affected by light. And now we just let this go ahead and catch up. There we are. So now you can see we've got this nice swirly inside there. And you can see we've got a little bit of movement already, you see here. In the brighter areas, it's much more obvious right now because right now in the middle it's quite dark, but now it's screen aligned. So as we move around, it looks like that moves with us, but the rainbow doesn't. So it gives it this effect of being double layered, which is really cool. Now, obviously we need some opacity here. We need to be able to, see through this bubble. And to do that, we're just going to take our Fresnel, which is already being used as our alpha mask, and plug this directly into our opacity. And now we'll have a nice thicker outline that's harder to see through on the edges and easier to see through in the middle. And that's going to give us a really basic little bubble. Now this on its own is going to be quite cheap compared to what we're going to make further in. Here we go, you see we're getting this nice bubble now. You can still see we're getting some of this nice swirly on the outside. Obviously the values right now are pushed a little bit too high. We can change these values around so that we get more color on the middle. I'll show you guys how to make that in a little while. If you're happy with your bubble being like this without any of the surface motion or any of the world position movement, so it makes it look a little bit more blobby on the outside, then go ahead and skip along. If not, then just keep watching. We're going to make a more complicated version, or just duplicate this. So if we were to say, go ahead and apply this, we can go to our bubbles material, and we can right click and we can duplicate this, and then go ahead and build in the more complicated version in a separate material if you want to. So from this, what we're going to do is we're going to add in some surface motion. And we're going to do this using the normals, but before we can have access to the normals, we need to change the lighting mode for our material. So under translucency, our lighting mode, we're going to change this to surface translucency volume. In fact, is that the one we want? Let's see, let's double check. They always, yes it is. They've got very similar names. My dyslexia really gets me there sometimes. That's the one we do want. Cool. Right, so what we're going to do now, we now have access to our normal. You can see here the normal pin is no longer grayed out. We can use a normal map, so we can give this some nice surface motion. And to do this, we're going to right-click, Texture, Object. And for this guy, we're going to use our trusty water norm, which you may have seen in previous tutorials. I'm going to provide it for you again, so don't worry about that. And we're going to use another material function call, and this is a four-way, the motion, it's the number 4, motion four-way chaos normal. We'll plug the texture into the texture 2D pin, and then we can plug this directly into the normal. What this is going to do is it's going to layer this normal map on top of itself and move them in different directions. And then we're going to get this nice kind of surface wobble on our bubble here. Now, it's going to take a little bit longer for it to compile, so we're just going to go ahead and make the next piece. The next piece that we're going to make is going to be the actual movement around the edges. So we're actually going to make the edges of the material move. So it's going to make the mesh look like it's blobbing around. And we're going to use world position offset for this. So again, we're going to, here we go. You can see we've got some surface normals on there. Look at that, look, little wobbles, so cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold U and left click, hold S and left click, and this is going to be our panner scale. And the reason we're going to be using a panner scale is because we're going to have these, the world position offset move around so that, you know, we get a bit of randomization on all of our different bubbles. We're going to set this to 1 for now. We're going to hold M and left click for multiply, and we're going to multiply these values together. And this is going to allow us to change the scaling of our world position offset texture so we can make the bumps look bigger or we can make them look smaller depending on what we needed. Next, we're going to hold P and left click for a panner. And we're going to plug this directly into the coordinate because we know that this is a UV coordinate with a scale. So we can plug this straight into the coordinate. The speed, we're going to want to control this as well, so we can have bubbles of different variants. So we're going to hold S and left click, and we're going to call this speed X. And hold S and left click and call this speed Y. Now the reason we're doing this is because we are going to want 2 values, one for X and one for Y. If we select the panner, you can see we have speed X and speed Y. Both right now are set to 0. But we only have 1 pin for speed. To make sure that we can use both of these values, we're going to be using an append that we mentioned earlier, so append vector. And this is going to take our speed X and our speed Y, which are both still 0. So it's going to take 0 and 0, and it's going to align them as a 2 vector, which is the same as this guy here, which is 0, 0. This now essentially contains exactly the same as this guy. We can plug this into our speed, and our panner is going to recognize that it's getting 2 values, and it will plug them into our available parameters in order. So it will take the first, A, and plug it into first, the second, B, and plug it into the second, which is why we call them speed X and speed Y. And now we can change these so we can have these custom to whatever we want. Next up, we need a texture, so we're going to hold T and left click, and we're just going to use some engine content here, and we're just going to search for noise. We should find tiling noise 5. And we'll plug our panner into the UVs here. And by default, we're not going to see this moving because we have a speed of 0 on both X and Y, but we don't need to worry about that in the preview. And we're going to hold M and left click for multiply and plug our texture into the multiply. Ooh. Engine's trying to catch up to me again. There you go. You wouldn't believe I've got 32 gigs of RAM in this machine, would you? Now we will hold S and left click for a scalar, and we're going to call this push amount. And what we're doing here is very similar to what we're doing with the swirly from before. We're taking the values of this texture, and then we're going to multiply this by a number. So by 1, it's just going to be its default values. Anything above 1 will make the bright bits brighter, and that will make the push more apparent. To do this though, we then need to tell it where to be pushing. So we're going to search for a vertex normal world space, and this will feed us all of the vertex information and then decide where to push it based on our texture. Hold M and multiply so we can get these in like so. And now we can go ahead and plug this into our world position offset, and that will allow our bubbles to be blobby on the outside while they're moving around. Obviously, we're going to need to give these some values, but we're going to set that into a material instance in just a little while. And the last thing that we're going to do, just so that we get a little bit of light bend, is we're just going to put a 0 into refraction. We could go ahead to this one and left click, by the way, to get this constant. We can convert this to a parameter, and we'll just call this refraction. Refraction amount. We're just going to leave this as 1. Now, the higher you push this value, the more it's going to distort what's behind the bubble. But we're not really going to increase this value. You do get some results from 0, just having something plugged into refraction seems to work. So there we go. We can now tick two-sided if we want to take this a little bit further so we can see the other side of the bubble. But we're going to leave it like this for now, and we're going to test this out. So we're going to press apply. There we go. Now you can see we're getting this nice refraction in there. The normal's affecting the refraction, and it's all starting to look weird. Now we don't have the bubbles that we've got in the little preview I showed you at the start here, but we're going to change that with a instance. So we're going to close this down. We're going to select our material, right click it, create material instance, and we'll open this up. And now in here, because we've set all these parameters, we can set our bubble to look however we want it to. So let's see. No, this is fine. So to get the same as what we've got in the preview, we're going to have a 0.124 value on our exponent, and that's going to give us a lot more color, but we don't really need to worry about that right now. Let's see, what else do we need? Our base reflect, here it is. In fact, that's the base reflect I've just typed into there. I'm such a dope. 124 into the base reflect. The exponent is going to be 4.8, like so. Then our panner scale, we're going for a 2. Our push amount, we're going for a 1.2, so we just get a little bit more of a blobby outside here. Our refraction amount, we're going to leave it as it is. Then our speed X is going to be 0.1. Our speed Y, we're going to say minus 0.1. Swirly power, we're going to up this to 2.58. Helps from typing, 2.58. And our tiling, we're just going to leave a line like so. And I believe our refraction does need to change to 1.10. There we go. So you can see we're getting this really nice result here. You can see we've got this nice rainbow in there. It's very, very faint, but if we were to change our swirly power up, you can see we can get a lot more rainbow in there, like so. But I'm just going to leave mine down at 2.58, like so. So let's see. Our base reflect, we've got, yeah, cool. So here we go. We've got our nice little bubble. You can see that we're getting some nice little distortion. Only very, very slight distortion on the edge here, but it's still there, and we're getting this nice wobble, which is nice and cool. So we'll press save, and we'll close this down. Now we'll bring a sphere into our little level, put our bubbles material on there. Now you can see that we're getting this nice bubble. Yay! So there we go, a lovely little bubble material. So let's see, how long have we been? Oh, it's quite a long video already. You want the particles? Do you want the particles? Let's make the particles. Particle system underscore bubble, or bubble underscore P rather. We'll open this up. And now we already know that we need this to affect a sphere for it to work in a really nice manner. So we're going to right click, type data, new mesh data, and this is going to give us the default particle cube. We're just going to search for sphere. We'll just take the default sphere. Now this is going to be huge. If we were to plop this into the world, our spheres will be massive. Well, they will be. Are they even bigger than this? Yeah, they are. So this is how big they are by default. So we're just going to take their initial size. I'm going to down this to maybe 0.1. Just to see how large they are. Let's see. Yeah, 0.1. So we're going to give these a minimum of 0.05, 0.05, 0.05, and then 1, like so. We're actually going to lock their XYZ axes. so that we don't get those stretched bubbles. They're always going to be spherical. Now, under the mesh data, we're going to set override material to true, and under required, we're going to put our bubbles material instance in there. And again, it's just going to take it a little bit to actually update this, but we don't need to worry about that right now. We're not going to need our color over life, and our initial velocity right now it's a little bit violent, right? So we're going to open this up, and we're just going to down this to maybe 50 and 20 so that they float a little bit. There we are. And under the lifetime, we will increase our maximum to maybe 5, so some of them will last a lot longer. There we go, now they're bubbling around. Now what they're doing at the minute is they're starting really, really small. So, they're starting the same size rather, so we're going to add a size by life. What we're going to do here is we're just going to add a new point to the curve. And right now they're starting at size of 1. Now this is 1 in relation to what their initial size is. So it's taking this initial value, 0.1, and then it's multiplying by this amount. So where it says 1 here, this means 1 in relation to 0.1. So 1 is 0.1. If we were to put this down to 0.5, then our 0.1 would therefore be 0.05. So what we're going to do is we're going to say start at 0. We want it to start as nothing. And then at maybe 0.1 of its life, we'll say they're a size of 1. And then in fact, we don't even need the third. We don't want them to shrink down. So we're just going to delete the third one back out. And now you can see that they're growing. Now they're growing a little bit quick. Very, very fast indeed. So we're just going to change this to maybe 0.5. Like so, cool. Now they look like they're popping up out of the ground and growing. The next thing that we need to do with these is we're just going to add in some initial rotation and then some rotation rate. So we're going to head to rotation, initial mesh rotation. And now you can see that we're getting some that have got red on top, some that have got blue on top. So you can see that it is affecting the mesh, which is grand. So we're not going to bother changing this, but we are going to go ahead and put in an initial mesh rotation rate. And you can see now they're spinning very, 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 very quick. So we're actually going to down this to maybe 0.1 and negative 0.1, like so. And now you can just see that they're rotating ever so slightly. There we are. Maybe we'll up that just a little bit. 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, negative 0.2, negative 0.2, negative 0.2. There we are. So now you can see we're getting some rotation here. Getting this nice effect. But again, we're still just popping up from a singular point, which we don't quite want. So we're going to just right click and we're going to add a location cylinder. And this is just going to choose a cylindrical location for these to actually spawn in. You can see here inside of our editor, if we were to go ahead and change our background color here, we can select our cylinder, head to the bottom, turn on 3D draw mode. This is the current radius of our cylinder. I am just going to up this start radius. They have a much wider area to pop up from, like so. Pretty cool. I'm going to head to the spawn rate, and I'm just going to down their spawn rate to maybe 5, because we're getting way too many of them right now. Hey, cool little bubbles. There we are, so you can see they've got their little swirly in there. They're swirling around. Maybe their lifetime's a little bit too short on the short bubbles. We'll increase it to 2 and a maximum of 7. There we are. Really nice. But now we're just getting them all floating in the original direction they're going, so we are just going to right click, acceleration, we say constant acceleration, and we're just going to go ahead and say on the Z, we kind of want these to float away a little bit more, so we're going to say 5, and we're going to put 2 in the X and the Y values. Now they will start in their initial and then just slowly push off in a different direction as they go. There we are, look. Whee! Kind of cool, right? Awesome. Awesome, cool. Now, the one thing that we are missing from these materials, now that I've just noticed, is we're not currently using any roughness to get a nice shine on the outside. What we're going to do is we're just going to hold 1, left click, and plug this into the roughness. Hold 1, left click, and set this to 1, and plug this directly into the metallic, like so. And now we'll get this really nice reflective shine from them rather than this little just specular dot right on the top of all the bubbles. And there we are. So there you go. Now we're getting this nice lighting on there too. Really neat little bubbles. There we are. Now obviously with all of the surface motion, it's barely visible. It's just there to just look a little bit fancier if you look really close. So I would suggest taking the more basic version and then just pushing the values to be closer to what we made inside of the material instance. But again, you know, if you want them to look exactly like this, then you're going to go ahead and use the slightly fancier version, the slightly more expensive version to run. But otherwise, use the other version. The other version is a lot more game friendly than this one. But there you go, everybody. Bubbles, bubbles, bubbles. Aren't they cute? The cutest little things. Oh, so sweet. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. As usual, the project file will be directly downloadable to all of my patrons that are $5 or above. Thank you for watching. You can find links to the Discord in the description, as well as the download link for any of the textures that you'll require for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.